On a Tuesday morning in September, a man stood on the balcony of a penthouse that no longer belonged to him, watching the city wake up below. 24 hours earlier, he had been worth $3.2 billion. Now, he had less than 4,000 in his personal account. His company, gone. His reputation, destroyed. His empire collapsed in a single catastrophic day of margin calls, lawsuits, and federal investigations. His name was David Chen, and for the first time in his 47 years, he had absolutely no idea what to do next. The newspapers were calling it the biggest financial collapse since Lehman Brothers. His face was on every business channel, every financial website, always with the same words: fraud, recklessness, arrogance, fall from grace. But what the headlines didn't show was the man standing alone in that penthouse, his hands trembling, his mind racing through the same question over and over: who am I without all of this? For 25 years, David had built his identity on one thing: winning. He won in business, he won in negotiations, he won in life, or so he thought. Now, with everything stripped away, he realized he had never actually known himself at all. The phone had stopped ringing 3 days ago. Friends, colleagues, investors, they all disappeared the moment the news broke. Even his wife had left, taking their 2 children to her parents' house, unable to look him in the eye. "You've become someone I don't recognize," she said before walking out. "Maybe you never were who I thought you were." David spent the next 72 hours in complete isolation. He didn't eat, barely slept, just sat in the empty penthouse surrounded by boxes of personal belongings he'd have to move out by the end of the week. His mind was a storm of rage, shame, and suffocating fear. He had lost everything, and worse, he had no one to blame but himself. On the 4th day, something broke inside him. Not his spirit, but his resistance. At 3 in the morning, exhausted and desperate, David did something he hadn't done in decades. He cried. Not the controlled, dignified tears of a man who still has his armor, but the raw, ugly sobbing of someone who has finally hit rock bottom. When the sun rose that morning, David made a decision. He couldn't change what had happened. He couldn't get his company back, couldn't erase the headlines, couldn't undo the damage. But he could do one thing. He could stop running from himself. He picked up his laptop and typed 3 words into the search bar: how to rebuild yourself. What he found changed everything. An article about cognitive reconstruction, a podcast about identity beyond achievement, a book about Stoic philosophy and the art of starting over. And then, buried in a forum discussion, a single sentence that stopped him cold. You don't need to rebuild your life. You need to rebuild your mind. David stared at those words for 20 minutes. Then he started reading. He read for 16 hours straight. Philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, memoirs of people who had lost everything and found themselves. When he finally closed his laptop, something had shifted. Not hope, not yet, but curiosity. A small, fragile question. What if this isn't the end? What if this is the beginning? The next morning, David did something completely unexpected. He left the penthouse at dawn and walked. Not to a meeting, not with a destination. He just walked through the city, anonymously, watching people go about their lives. A street vendor setting up his fruit stand. A janitor cleaning an office building. A young mother pushing a stroller, singing softly to her child. For the first time in 25 years, David actually saw them. Not as background characters in his success story, but as human beings living full lives that had nothing to do with him. And he realized, these people were happy, content, purposeful, without needing billions of dollars or empire status. They had something he had never learned to cultivate, an identity that didn't depend on external validation. On that walk, David encountered an old bookstore tucked between 2 modern buildings. Inside, an elderly man with kind eyes was organizing philosophy books on a wooden shelf.
David found himself drawn to a section labeled Ancient Wisdom. The old man noticed him staring and said gently, "Looking for something specific or just browsing?" David hesitated, then spoke the truth. "I don't know what I'm looking for. I lost everything recently. I'm trying to figure out how to start over." The old man studied him for a moment, then pulled a thin, worn book from the shelf. "This helped me once, when I lost everything that mattered. Maybe it will help you too." The book was Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. David almost laughed. A Roman emperor's journal? What could that possibly teach him about recovering from financial ruin in the modern world? But something in the old man's eyes made him take it. "Read entry number 2, the man said. "Then come back if you want to talk." That night, David opened the book. Entry 2 read, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." David read it again, and suddenly something clicked. For 25 years, he had tried to control everything: markets, people, outcomes, perception. And the moment those external things failed, he collapsed, because his entire sense of self was tied to them. But what if he had been playing the wrong game all along? What if real strength wasn't in controlling the world, but in controlling his response to it? David returned to the bookstore the next day. The old man, whose name was Thomas, smiled when he saw him. "You came back." "I came back," David confirmed. "Can we talk?" Over the next 3 months, David visited Thomas 3 times a week.
They sat in the back of the bookstore, drinking tea, discussing philosophy, psychology, and the nature of identity. Thomas had been a successful architect once, lost everything in a divorce and business failure, and spent years rebuilding, not his career, but his mind. "I learned something crucial," Thomas told him one afternoon. "We are not what we achieve. We are not our bank accounts or our titles or our reputations. Those are just temporary costumes we wear. The real question is, who are you underneath all of that?" David didn't have an answer, so Thomas gave him an assignment. "For the next 30 days, I want you to strip away every identity you've ever worn. No entrepreneur, no billionaire, no husband, no father, not even your name. I want you to sit with the raw experience of being human, without any labels, and then tell me what you discover." It was the hardest thing David had ever done. Harder than building a billion-dollar company, harder than losing it all, because it required him to face the truth. He had no idea who he was. He had spent his entire adult life becoming someone impressive, someone powerful, someone the world would admire. But he had never asked, "Who do I want to be for myself?" Every morning, David sat in silence for an hour. No phone, no laptop, no distractions. Just him and his thoughts. At first, it was torture. His mind screamed with anxiety, regret, shame. But slowly, something else emerged. Underneath all the noise, there was a quiet voice. Not the voice that pushed him to achieve, to dominate, to win, but a gentler voice that asked, "What truly matters? What kind of person brings meaning to your life?" "I spent my whole life chasing more," David told Thomas on week 4. "More money, more success, more recognition. But I never asked, more of what, and for what purpose?" Thomas nodded. "That's the trap of achievement addiction. You keep moving the goalpost, thinking happiness is just one more win away. But it never comes because you're looking in the wrong place." "So where is it?" David asked desperately. Thomas smiled. "It's not a place, David. It's a practice. Happiness isn't something you achieve. It's something you cultivate internally, regardless of external circumstances. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years ago. So did the Buddhists. So did every wisdom tradition in human history. But our modern world has forgotten." David learned his first crucial lesson that day. You cannot rebuild your life until you rebuild your relationship with yourself. For decades, he had treated himself like a machine, something to optimize for maximum output. He measured his worth by his productivity, his net worth, his status. But that wasn't living. That was performing.
What if, Thomas asked him one day, you treated yourself the way you would treat someone you deeply loved, with patience, with compassion, with forgiveness? David's eyes welled up. I don't know if I deserve that.
And there, Thomas said gently, is the real work. The second lesson came during week 7. David had started volunteering at a community center, teaching basic business skills to people trying to start small enterprises. One evening, a young woman named Maria approached him after class. "Thank you," she said simply. "You made me believe I could do this." David was confused. He hadn't done anything special, just shared some basic knowledge. But Maria's gratitude was genuine, profound. Later that night, David realized something shocking. This moment, this simple exchange with Maria, felt more meaningful than any billion-dollar deal he had ever closed. Why? He brought the question to Thomas. Because, Thomas explained, meaning doesn't come from scale or magnitude. It comes from genuine connection and contribution. You spent 25 years building something massive, but did it ever truly matter to you? Or were you just proving something to the world? David sat with that question for days. The painful truth emerged. His entire empire had been an elaborate defense mechanism. He was trying to prove he was worthy, valuable, important. But to whom? To a father who died when David was 12 and never said he was proud? To classmates who mocked him for being poor? To some invisible audience that didn't actually care? You were running from your own sense of inadequacy, Thomas said, building bigger and bigger monuments to cover a small wound. But wounds don't heal by covering them. They heal by bringing them into the light. That night, David wrote a letter to his 12-year-old self. He told that scared little boy, "You are enough. You were always enough. You didn't need to prove anything." The third lesson came during week 10, when David's court date arrived. He had to face federal investigators, angry investors, former employees. His lawyer had warned him it would be brutal. And it was. For 6 hours, David was grilled, accused, humiliated in public record. The old David would have fought back, defended his ego, blamed circumstances. But something had changed. David simply told the truth. Yes, he had made reckless decisions. Yes, he had prioritized growth over responsibility. Yes, he had hurt people. He didn't make excuses. He didn't deflect. He just owned it, completely. When the hearing ended, his lawyer was stunned. "Why didn't you defend yourself more? You could have pushed back on some of those accusations." David shook his head. "Because they were right, and I'm done running from that." That night, Thomas asked him how it felt. "Terrifying," David admitted, "but also liberating. For the first time in my life, I'm not hiding behind an image. This is just who I am, flawed, human, trying to do better." That, Thomas said with deep respect, that is the beginning of wisdom. When you stop defending your ego and start living from truth, even painful truth, you become free. Because you're no longer controlled by fear of exposure. There's nothing left to expose. The fourth lesson emerged during week 12, when David's daughter Emma reached out. She was 15 and had refused to see him since the collapse. Her message was short. "Dad, can we talk?" They met at a park. Emma was angry, hurt, confused. "Why did you do it? Why did you risk everything? Weren't we enough for you?" David could have given her the easy answer. Business is complicated, things happen. But he chose truth. "Emma, I was chasing something I thought would make me feel worthy, but I was wrong. And in that chase, I neglected what actually mattered. You, your brother, your mom. I can't change that, but I can promise you this. I'm done chasing ghosts. I'm learning to be present with what's real." Emma didn't forgive him immediately, but something in her expression softened. "Are you different now? Really different?" David thought carefully. "I'm becoming different. It's a process, not a switch. But yes, Emma,
I'm not the man I was. I'm trying to become someone better." They talked for 2 hours. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a beginning. And David learned something profound. Authenticity creates connection. All those years of maintaining a perfect image, of being the successful father, the powerful provider, had created distance. But vulnerability, admitting his failures, being real about his journey, that created a bridge. The fifth and most important lesson came during week 16, when Thomas asked David a simple question. If you could never rebuild your wealth, never restore your reputation, never return to the life you had, could you be happy? David's immediate instinct was to say no, but he paused, sat with it, and then, to his own surprise, he answered, "Yes, I think I could." "Why?" Thomas pressed. "Because," David said slowly, "I've spent the last 4 months discovering parts of myself I never knew existed. I've connected with people in ways I never did when I was chasing success. I've felt more alive, more present, more human than I did in 25 years of building an empire. It's not that I wouldn't want success again, but I no longer need it to feel whole." Thomas's eyes glistened. "Then you've learned the ultimate lesson. You are not what you lost. You are what remains when everything else is stripped away. And what remains, David, is enough." David felt something break open in his chest. Not pain this time, but release. For months, he had been carrying the crushing weight of loss. But in this moment, he realized he hadn't lost himself. He had found himself. 6 months after the collapse, David started a small consulting practice. Not to rebuild an empire, but to genuinely help small business owners avoid the mistakes he had made. He lived in a modest apartment, drove a used car, had dinner with his kids twice a week, visited Thomas every Sunday. His income was 1% of what it used to be. His status, gone. His power, irrelevant.
But for the first time in his adult life, David Chen was genuinely happy. Not the fleeting high of closing a deal, but the deep, sustainable contentment of living aligned with his values. He had learned what the ancient philosophers knew. External success is fragile and temporary. Internal alignment is unshakable and eternal. 1 year after losing everything, Emma asked him, "Dad, if you could go back and prevent the collapse, would you?" David thought about the man he used to be, driven, successful, hollow. Then he thought about who he was becoming, humble, present, whole. "Honestly, Emma, no, because that collapse didn't destroy me. It freed me from a life I thought I wanted but was actually suffocating me. I lost everything I had, but I found everything I needed." The billionaire who rebuilt his mind teaches us something the world desperately needs to hear. You are not your achievements. You are not your bank account. You are not your status or your reputation or your past. Those things can be taken from you in an instant. But who you are at your core, the values you choose, the person you decide to become, that can never be taken. Only surrendered. David had spent 25 years building an empire on sand. Then, in the ruins, he discovered bedrock, a sense of self that didn't depend on anything external. He learned that true wealth is not measured in dollars, but in peace of mind. True power is not control over others, but mastery over yourself. True success is not what you achieve, but who you become in the process. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." David discovered this truth the hard way. He had to lose billions to find something priceless, himself. Not the self he performed for the world, but the self that existed underneath all the achievements and failures. The self that was already whole, already enough, already worthy, just waiting to be noticed. So ask yourself, who are you without your accomplishments, without your job title, your income, your reputation? If everything external was stripped away tomorrow, what would remain? That's not a thought experiment. That's the most important question you'll ever answer. Because life is fragile, success is temporary, loss is inevitable. But who you choose to be in the face of all that, that's yours forever.
David Chen lost $3.2 billion. But in the wreckage of that loss, he found something far more valuable, a life worth living. Not because of what he had, but because of who he chose to become. And that is a wealth that can never be taken, never lost, never destroyed. That is the only investment that truly matters, the investment in yourself. Not the self you show the world, but the self you are when no one is watching. That's where real rebuilding begins. That's where true wealth is found. That's where you discover you were never broken. You were just buried under things that didn't matter.
And now, finally, you're free.